I'm speaking today from Melbourne, Australia, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I speak, the Kulin Nation, and also pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and emerging. My name's Alison Ennis. I'm Senior Digital Accessibility Specialist at the National Australia Bank, NAB. I've pale skin, blonde hair, starting to turn white, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, and a slight difference from the little profile pic that's on the first design, on the first slide that you can see. I'm also wearing glasses. And today I'm really pleased to talk to you about the NAB mobile banking app and show you how we've embedded accessibility into the design process, with the ultimate aim of ensuring that our mobile banking app is accessible by design. So a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to go through today. I'm going to touch on accessibility at NAB and what our obligations are. I'm going to have a look through the accessible design process, inclusive design principles, what makes an accessible design, what are the constraints that we've taken into account and incorporated into our process. I'm going to go through a little bit about the design specifications and GEL component library and how we've included accessibility in our approach to specifications and GEL component creation. I'm going to show you some examples from the specs and do a couple of demos of the mobile banking app. So firstly, accessibility at NAB. Well, NAB is committed to improving access to our internal technology services, as well as our customer-facing online channels, products and services. There are legal obligations we need to be aware of. There's the Disability Discrimination Act 1992. We've got to ensure that people with disabilities have the same fundamental rights to access to information and services as others in the community. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also the Australian Human Rights Commission, or AHRC. In the finance industry, we also have the Australian Banking Association Code of Practice, and this specifically calls out accessibility as a banking requirement. And also internally within NAB, we have a group inclusion and diversity policy. We have the Accessibility Steering Committee. We have a dedicated digital accessibility team. And this has grown massively over the last 5 years or so. And we've now got over 10 digital accessibility specialists in that team. We have an accessibility action plan. And in fact, NAB was the first bank in Australia to lodge an action plan with the Australian Human Rights Commission. And that plan clearly states that we're committed to embedding accessibility, usability and universal design principles within our business to ensure that our customers' user experience becomes our business as usual approach in banking. And our aim is to make sure that premises, goods, services, employment opportunities are more accessible to people with disability. Now, accessibility, inclusion, it's a big part of our culture at NAB, and our vision is to continually improve accessibility for our people and also for our customers. We want to make it easy for customers with accessibility needs to do business with us, no matter how they choose to interact with us. So our goal is really to create a great user experience and provide accessible features to our customers. So this is where we're going to start looking at inclusive design principles, because this is how we get to that goal. And there's a quote here on this slide from the Microsoft Design Toolkit. Disability arises when there are mismatched human interactions. So disability happens at those points of interaction between a person and society. No one is disabled until they try to do something and can't because of a barrier, whether it's stairs preventing me from accessing or entering a building, or the choice of font on a screen, which might prevent me from reading some of that content. So it's not the disability which is the barrier, it's the inaccessible service or product that creates a barrier when a user attempts to access it. Now, the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit goes into a lot more detail on this, and you can find that at microsoft.com/design/inclusive. But essentially, everyone is different and we all have different needs. So when we're looking at developing new features in the NAB mobile banking app, we aim to design for everyone. And that's where inclusive design principles come in. So there's obviously some design constraints or user needs that we need to take into account. Now, constraints are fantastic. Constraints allow exploration of new approaches that lead to better products for all users. And constraints that we're keeping in front of mind when designing our digital experiences include ensuring use by those with limited or no vision, differences in colour perception, use with limited or no hearing, use with dexterity and mobility impairments, temporary or permanent, use with cognitive disabilities, different age groups, young or old, digital power users, casual users, but really everyone who enjoys a quality experience. Now, everyone has abilities, different abilities, and limitations to their abilities. So including accessibility constraints simply is another user group or another set of people with similar needs, goals, and concerns to take into account. Now, accessibility is not a barrier to innovation, and this can be a bit of a common misconception. In fact, inclusive design requires us to unlock or open up our approach. We actually have to be more creative to be more inclusive and accessible. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually leads to designs that benefit people universally. So how do we do this? Well, we collaborate and iterate on accessibility at all stages of the development lifecycle of new feature initiatives in the banking platform. So that's design, build, and test. So to deliver value for all our users, we need to ensure that accessibility is included at all stages of development. And what we're actually doing is within NAB, accessibility requirements are written by the BAs. They are based on a repository or a library of component accessibility behavior and reviewed by a specialist if needed, or created by a specialist if particularly complex. Our developers create accessible code, and they use the Ali Inspector for iOS and the Ali Scanner on Android as part of daily build test activities. User story accessibility testing is carried out within the scrums. The QEs do their own accessible testing at the same time and as part of functional testing. It's just another flavor of functional testing, really. And accessibility is included in walkthroughs and showcases. We make use of Applitools and Perfecto in our automation testing suite. We've included accessibility on our regression suites, core flows, all new features, and these are run nightly on daily builds. So we're really making sure that at every opportunity, we're trapping any accessibility issues before it gets too far down the development lifecycle. So accessibility is considered business as usual in mobile. Everyone is highly committed to achieving an accessible outcome. We follow its agile accessibility. We're constantly iterating and looking at our approach and making sure that we are keeping accessibility front of mind. So this commitment and willingness to embrace accessibility from the mobile platform and the design team, it's enabled us to sort of shift left, and we're providing input in the really early stages of projects, the UX and the UI phases. Now, our mobile design specs include accessibility as a standard, and this is really, really important. Our designers at NAB, they really do get accessibility, the need and requirement for its inclusion, and they've been 100% on board with keeping accessibility right at the forefront of platform feature development. It's called out specifically in our specs, and I'll show you some examples in a few slides. But maybe now, really importantly, it is also just considered a natural part of a feature or a specification being ready for development. It doesn't get past that first gateway without having that accessibility layer or review. So accessibility is written in black and white, sometimes red, sometimes green, orange. A bit of colour is good when used in the right way. So keeping those design constraints in mind, what this means in practical terms when we translate it to our design specs is that we call out specific requirements relating to accessibility, such as use of colour and colour contrast ratios, scaling behaviour, what happens when a component or a screen is scaled up, the wrapping, the stacking, the visibility and how that stacks up on screen. Clear content, clear layout, logical structure, logical flow of processes, meaningful grouping of information and grouping together of announcements that make sense to be together. Screen reader announcements, particularly if there's any sort of logos or visual aspects that also are conveying meaning, making sure that that is included for screen reader users. Hit area, touch target size, make sure everything is comfortable and easy to activate, and interactive states. We ensure consistency across features, making sure we're not reinventing the wheel every time, and clearly mark interactive elements. So all our users understand how to interact with an element or component. So all this fantastic design thinking has gone into creation of design specs, reusable spec templates, which include accessibility. And also we've created a GEL component library with accessible components. And these components are all used as the building blocks for feature development in mobile platform. And over the next few slides, I'll go through in more detail what that means in practice. So the design specification and the GEL component library, GEL meaning Global Experience Language. So it's been a big collaborative effort with our mobile tech leads, the design team, and development scrums. And over the last few years, we've developed a mobile GEL component library, and all features use this, as I've mentioned, and all these components have accessibility baked in. The GEL component library is designed with accessibility in mind. So we've got reusable, shared, standardized components and interactions, repeatable, reusable, and we're making use of native patterns where possible. And the GEL includes components such as, primary, secondary, tertiary buttons, links, toggles, tabs, and some of our customized components that we use and patterns that we use regularly for similar interactions across the app. And we continue to build and extend existing components or build more components as use case and opportunity arises. Now, the specification sheets for GEL components and also feature developments, they have separate sections to outline requirements for accessibility, but the way we do this is it's embedded within the whole spec as a complete document, rather than calling out accessibility as sort of an extra. So we look at color use, we show scaling, we show spacing, alignment to maximize readability, interactive states, as we've mentioned, screen reader announcements, and hit area and touch target. All these sorts of things are clearly labeled on the specs. So an example here is for color. So we've got the color contrast ratios on there. So to avoid any ambiguity or questions, things can look, contrast can look different when you're reviewing a PDF or something on screen. So we specifically call out those ratios in the specs. So there's no ambiguity that something may not be meeting the ratio for text 4.5 to 1 or non-text elements 3 to 1. Obviously, we don't rely on color to convey meaning. We add visual labels or text labels where possible, avoiding just iconography, and avoiding color combinations which are known to cause difficulties, color perception, red and green, for example. Scaling behavior, we have separate sections to outline, what the default view is like and what the scaled up behavior should be. Differences between iOS and Android are called out. How the content scales up is specifically shown, so what the wrapping rules are and the stacking rules, so as to preserve meaning and ensure visibility when users scale up the screen. And these specs, they're used by devs, testers to confirm behavior during development. Screen reader announcements. If there's anything specifically different to the visible text, we call out screen reader announcements. So there's examples here on the screen of an interactive element, label, and then button, double tap to activate. And if we've got that different icon on there that shows we're going to open in a new window, then we've got some screen reader only text that says, opens in a web browser. So we specifically call out those announcements if we need to convey meaning for support icons such as that. We show focus states, pressed, hover states to ensure users can easily identify an element in those states. So this is specifically to support visual screen reader users, external keyboard, mouse, switch users. Again, color contrast ratios are also specified clearly on here, so there's no ambiguity. So I'm going to show you a demo now of screen reader usage of our GEL modal component. So this is an internal demo app used for testing, etc. And the components shown in the video are in use and live in the production app. but the video is showing the iOS demo app. We do have the same for Android.
Gel demo, close, button. Remove profile from device, heading. This is subheading 1, heading. This is paragraph 1. This is paragraph 2. This is subheading 2, heading. Bullet, this is bulleted paragraph 1. Bullet, this is bulleted paragraph 2. This is a paragraph with really long text. This is designed to wrap over multiple lines to demonstrate things like text wrapping and text scaling. This is paragraph 3. This is paragraph 4. This is a paragraph with really long text. This is designed to wrap over multiple lines to demonstrate things like text wrapping and text scaling. Okay, let's do it. Button.
Okay, so some things you may have noticed there with the announcement. There's visually an X or close button, and that's announced as close rather than just X. So we've got the screen reader only text on there to ensure meaning of that button is conveyed. You would have heard that headings were identified as headings. And this is really important because headings can be used to navigate really long screens using the secondary navigation mechanisms on mobile devices, so the iOS rotor or the Android local context menu. And the focus areas were outlined as you swipe through each element. The focus areas were spanning the width of the screen. And this maximizes discoverability by people who use Explore by Touch, which is simply pressing on your finger on the screen, holding your finger there and moving around the screen to sort of discover the different elements that might be on that screen. Now this Gel demo app, it allows us to develop and test components in isolation of the test app. And it's a really good reference for anyone starting out with testing accessibility on our mobile app, and provides a consistent reference as well for baseline for components, testing components when we go through operating system updates or different versions of different phones on Android.
Gel demo.
So this screen, I think I may have missed, no. The screen here, the accessible Gel components, they're the building blocks that are now used in all our features. And this screen here is a before and after shot screenshot of the mobile uplift project, which we went through a few years ago. So the image on the left is the pre-uplift version. It's a little bit dark, it's a little bit clunky. Some screen reader interactions were difficult. We had some floating elements that caused problems sometimes. So the uplifted screen and the redesigned flow, we've got a nice clear layout. We have removed the sticky elements that can cause issues. We have screen reader only refresh button is now available to all users. No real need to hide that, which we were doing previously. Buttons are accessible via tab on external keyboards. So we were able to provide extra accessibility for keyboard only external keyboard users as well. So we've improved access for many people, and aspects of accessibility we've just gone through in the design specs, the scaling, the touch targets, the screen reader grouping, the logical flow of information, etc. That was all used in that uplift project. So another screen here of the transaction history screen. So this is going to the next level from the first slide that I just showed you. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the previous or the pre-uplift screen. Some of the information is a little bit squashed. It is overlapping. This is in large text mode. So what we did with the uplift is ensured we addressed those issues, and wrapping and stacking of transaction information, it's much easier to read. Words aren't broken up over lines when scaled up. The information is no longer cramped together quite so much. There's no overlapping of elements, and content scales and reflows accordingly. So we had to redesign some interactions, such as the search and filter elements, to remove this overlapping and just position them in a place that was useful and available to all users. So on the next slide, I've now got another short video. This is a video of the production NAB app in the test or stub environment. So it's all fake data. And it's showing you the account summary and the credit card and transaction history screens.
NAB test, chat available, button, search, button, logout, button, NAB. Good afternoon mobile acceleration, Accounts. Heading. Do you have a NAB Rewards card? The new NAB Rewards card. Button. More options about do you have a NAB Rewards card? Button. Credit card. American Express. Card ending 2582. Available balance $0. Current balance minus $10,998. Button. Transaction account. Credit card. NAB test. Back button. American Express. Heading. Refresh. Button. Warning. Your payment is due by the 3rd of December. Card ending 2582. Available balance $0. Current balance minus $10,998. Pay. Button 1 of 2. Details. Button 2 of 2. Button. Characters. Headings. Monday the 12th of January, 2015, plus $1,010,970. Head. Sunday the 11th of January, 2015, plus Monday the 12th of American Express. Heading.
So a few things you may have picked up on there in that video. The icon buttons which sit in the header section for chat and log out, they're announced. It's not just the symbol or file name. So we're clearly conveying what those icon buttons do. Interactive custom elements are identified so the user knows how to interact with it. So the account tiles, for instance, are identified as button. We have a warning icon for credit card due date. So again, that's included in the icon, not just exclamation mark. Headings are identified, and as you saw there with the iOS rotor, that facilitates navigation along long screens. And this is particularly useful actually when you have a very long, or maybe the last 3 months, let's say, of transactions that you're wanting to skip through and jump through. Now, those two screens and those screenshots is just a small part of the Uplift project, and we haven't gone into I haven't gone into all the detail here, but it is a great achievement and it looks fantastic. There's some fantastic, amazing functionality in there, and it is accessible. So the achievement we're celebrating here, and really the focus of this presentation, is the journey that we've taken to get to this point. And accessibility, most key actually, it was part of that journey right from the beginning, right from design through to delivery. I want to say a big shout out here really to NAB and the mobile platform, our fantastic design team, and all my colleagues in the accessibility team for their commitment to accessibility and adoption of a genuine inclusive approach. And we wouldn't have been able to get this process going and embed accessibility as we have been without sort of that commitment to accessibility from everybody who's been involved. So accessible and inclusive design, it doesn't only help people with disability. Everyone may experience a restriction or a change in ability at some point, whether it be situational, temporary or permanent. And some examples shown here on screen, taken from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. You may have an arm injury, which means you can't use the mouse quite so easily if you're using your left hand, whereas normally you might prefer your right. Maybe an ear infection prevents you from hearing video content quite so clearly, you're relying on captions. Homeschool over the last 2 years, I went through this, many people went through this, helping their children, learning to read, splitting your focus. Again, accessibility, clear content and clear guidelines helps enormously there. Maybe lost your voice, can't use your voice quite so well and want to use keyboard or other mechanisms to speak or interact with people. And obviously for the last 2 years, we've all been mainly online and living virtual lives. We've had to develop and adapt a lot, and can really appreciate the potential cognitive overload when our senses have been restricted, as they have been for most of us over the last couple of years. And we have to adapt and create and take different approaches to interactions and communication. So really, as well as those with limited or no vision, hearing, mobility, cognition, for whom accessibility is essential, really inclusive design thinking also benefits everyone. So it is essential for some and beneficial for all. And again, you can go and have a look at more information about the Microsoft Design Toolkit at microsoft.com/design/inclusive. So really, the outcome that we've been able to achieve is that we're delivering a great user experience and accessible banking features to our customers. And at NAB, we really do aim to provide access for all our customers, regardless of ability or choice of interactive pathway, to all the features and initiatives that we deliver. And what we found is when we're taking this accessible and inclusive design approach, what we're really doing is we're delivering features to our customers, which are accessible by design. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Great. We have had some questions coming through so far. Participants, I encourage you to continue adding questions. So first up, how do you handle issues when mobile design specs or standards on iOS or Android fall short of accessibility standards?
I didn't quite catch that, but what we do when we're discussing around the mobile design specs is we obviously use WCAG and we refer to accessible design standards, and we feed all that into the design thinking process. When the native behaviors or interactions don't quite meet the accessibility standards that we want to achieve within NAB, then we consider changing that or making customized components that do meet those requirements. So it's really a bit of a collaborative and iterative process to see what we can do, how we can do it, and how best can we do it. So we do try and do native where possible, but if native falls short by a considerable margin from accessibility requirements, we do customize and change, and we feed that into our design specs. So the individual components should be or are highly accessible. We do look at the components from quite a thorough and comprehensive aspect to ensure that all accessibility requirements are included in those design components. When we're gluing things together within features, there are sometimes some differences and concessions and changes that we can follow and make just by virtue of the overall design and what information is where on the screen. Hopefully that answers your question. I didn't fully hear the question, unfortunately.
I think you were able to tap into it just great. So the next question is, what have been your observations that led to the decision for removing sticky elements?
They can cause real problems because they're permanently on screen. They can hide things visually. They can be quite difficult to avoid if you're trying to activate elements which may sit underneath them. So sort of for that sort of reason and obscuring content, we tend not to do accessible, we tend not to do sticky elements, or we moved away from sticky elements. It was just the pay button that we had there that was sticky. And although that was an important sort of feature that you might want to do on the screen, we just felt that not having it sticky was more beneficial for more people.
Great. Next up was, what sort of artifacts do you use for your design specs? For example, do you document these things right in Figma or another design tool that you use, or do you use a separate document? How do you document these design specs?
Yeah, we used InVision. I don't personally create the specs. I work with the design team. They are responsible for creating and maintaining the artifacts. So we've used InVision. I believe Figma is another one that could be used, but really anything that you create your design in, you can include accessibility in there, because it's just another flavor or annotation or section that you might want to include in your spec. So, you know, it really can be done in any platform.
The next question was, most of the examples so far use portrait orientation. Was landscape orientation considered, and if so, did it present any unique challenges in design?
Yeah, that's a really good one. For component-based designs, absolutely, we consider the portrait orientation as well as the landscape orientation. We do have restrictions in the way that our banking app is coded at the moment, in that we are restricted to the portrait mode, but that is something that the technical team do look at and revise and review, and certainly with any sort of future new development, it's something that we do constantly feed in as to, you know, can we do this? How can we do this? Is this the right time to support landscape as well as portrait.
Great. Next up, it sounds like your team was really receptive to prioritizing accessibility. What recommendations do you have if you're struggling to get that buy-in?
It can be hard, and it can be hard to get that buy-in. We do have very, very receptive people, as you mentioned, within NAB and within accessibility team. We do have a very big accessibility team, but that hasn't always been the case. You know, it started off 5, 7, 8 years ago or so with just one person who was pushing for accessibility. And, you know, he did an amazing job just pushing for awareness and raising accessibility concerns. And since then, you know, the team has grown and the awareness has grown. So a lot of it is about raising awareness and doing presentations, showing people on their mobile devices. And mobile devices are a great way actually of raising awareness, because everybody with a mobile device, you've got instant accessibility features on there. You can scale it up, you can turn on the screen reader, although you do need to be sure that you can turn it off before your screen locks. So we do encourage everyone to set up the shortcut first on the screen reader so that you can turn it on and off until you're really comfortable with it. And doing those sorts of awareness sessions are really key to helping other people, you know, put their raise empathy, raise awareness, and put themselves in other people's shoes. Try out the screen reader, scale up the screen size. I mean, there's a lot of people who do operate on large scale who wouldn't necessarily identify as having an accessibility need, but still use large text, and that is accessibility, making things clear and readable and understandable. You know, to a lot of people would think, oh, well, that's just, you know, all about writing good copy, but it's also accessibility, and just sort of highlighting the parallels between accessibility and what you might just be doing anyway is really important. And I think a lot of people, maybe over the last couple of years when we have been thrown into this virtual environment, have appreciated accessibility for digital software and ease of use, and not having to think about, well, what does this button do? Is it very clear what it's going to do, and what's going to happen when I click on it, tap on it, activate it with the screen reader? So it's maybe been a little bit easier over the last few years to sort of raise awareness, perhaps, because we've had to take a lot more things into account in the virtual world that we've already been thinking about for accessibility, but it's sort of got a bit more wider awareness. So yeah, raising awareness, it can be difficult to get that light bulb moment, but I think demonstrations and just keeping talking and keeping raising the word accessibility. And have you thought about accessibility to anybody who sort of starts looking at any kind of development? Have you considered accessibility? Have you considered color? You know, baby steps. Maybe start with the easy things. You know, it can be quite difficult and daunting to make something accessible, because, you know, it is a huge area. There's a lot of things that you can do. WCAG is massive, but just start with some easy things, you know, color contrast, iconography, simple announcements, and that sort of thing. So it's just about being persistent as well, I think, and just don't take no for an answer. Just keep talking accessible.
Some great points there, especially about making the connection that accessibility benefits everyone, not just those with disabilities. And really the principles are the same. It's good design.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you break your arm, or, you know, you have an ear infection, again, you don't necessarily connect that with having an accessibility need, but if we've taken accessibility into account, then, you know, you can just adapt and you can interact in an equivalent way to how you could when you weren't restricted by a broken arm or an ear infection.
Absolutely. We talk a lot here about disability being a spectrum, not a binary, and that fits right in. The next question here, can you talk about the role of user testing as you develop the app? What methodologies were used and how did the app evolve with user feedback?
Yeah, user testing, it's fantastic. It's, you need to do it. You need to get the customers and real users access to your designs and flows and approaches and experiences that you're looking to design. We haven't been able to incorporate too many people with disability as yet. We've had a few projects that, we have difficulty identifying or finding participants who can fit the brief and are willing to do user testing, but it is absolutely really important. And we do ask and keep promoting and keep pushing to include people with a disability in user research. So yeah, it's been a little bit more difficult over the last few years because we've been virtual, and working out how to do user testing with people with disabilities over this environment is a little bit of a challenge. But again, it's something that we really want to develop more of in the future, and getting users with a disability into that user research and user sessions is really, really important.
Great. We had a question somewhat specific to some of the content that you were showing. So one of our participants noticed that you utilized tap for details. So how do you balance language like that with the additional context that users might need for understanding what they're tapping into?
Yeah, that's tap for details. That shows when we haven't got all the transaction information. So that's really good to pick up on that. So we show that it's not a permanent thing that shows on the screen. So we would expect that when that is shown, the users already understand how that screen works, and that most of those elements, or all of those elements actually potentially on that screen, will tap through to a transaction detail screen. So the fact that it says tap for details, it's sort of a little bit of a warning to the user to say, well, we haven't quite got all this information through yet because it hasn't come through in the system, but you can tap for more details and it shows you the transaction details. That's quite an old message, actually. It's potentially something that we could review to say maybe information not currently available, or something a bit more specific than tap for details. Yeah, I guess that's perhaps a little bit ambiguous as to what that's going to do, but given that every other element on that screen is interactive and it goes through a transaction details screen, we kind of make the assumption there that users will also be able to link that to those same account detail elements.
Great. I think they were just looking for insight into your thinking, so that is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an old one. It's a really old one, that one. That one's been there for a while, and I'll make a note of that, actually, because it's not something that I've specifically considered that we needed to review and change. But yeah, fresh eyes, we were talking about this before the presentation started. Fresh eyes are always fantastic for picking up little things like that perhaps aren't ideal. They work, they're okay, but they're perhaps not as great as they could be. So I've made a note of that one and feed that into the next discussions when we look at that component.
It's the beauty of AppsCon, bringing together folks.
Yes, absolutely.
We had another question about what accessibility guidelines do you strive for? Are you aiming for WCAG 2.1 or are you aiming for 2.0? And has that changed throughout your accessibility journey as an organization?
Yes, we currently are working to 2.1 AA, but we do also keep an eye on AAA and do that where we can. We're also looking forward to 2.2 and 3, and just being aware of changes in the industry and best practice as such. So WCAG is at the core of how we can assess and test individual elements and flows and features, but we also take a pragmatic approach as well and look at the design and usability. So yes, we need to tick those boxes for WCAG, but we also need to make sure that it's functional, meaningful, usable, for all those different sort of functional needs, use without vision, use without hearing or limited hearing, etc. So yeah, we do follow WCAG, but we also sort of extend that to include best practice usability as well, particularly in areas where maybe WCAG, we want to sort of get those AAA areas too.
Great. The next question was in regards to upskilling. So what processes do you have in place for new resources to upskill to your defined standards?
Yeah, sure. A lot of it so far is, you know, we've sort of evolved over the last few years and worked closely with the design team and individual designers to upskill by collaboration and talking and making sure, you know, that specs and features include that sort of accessible thinking. We've been part of the design team for quite some time, although accessibility is its own team. We are sort of very closely linked with design. So we attend similar meetings and we do presentations with the design team, and we're always sort of looking for opportunities to raise awareness and talk about accessibility. In the accessibility team, we do have onboarding for new members to the team, and to the mobile side of it as well. We've sort of got a process for, you know, go through, read all our information, do a bit of testing, learn about the screen readers. This is how we do our designs, and the fact that we've got templates and we've got reusable components that are pulled into those templates for developing features means that we get a lot of that accessibility pulled in naturally, because we've already worked out that that button component is accessible, and this is how you do it, and this is how you make it announce. So pull that in, and that bit of the design is going to be accessible. So it's in the design team, we could probably have a bit more of a formalized process. It's a lot of it at the moment is just by collaboration and working closely with designers. Certainly we're always brought into design meetings and project meetings. So everybody asks that question, what about accessibility? Have you thought about accessibility? But design has been really pro accessibility and on board with accessibility from the start. So it's been relatively easy, I suppose, although it's taken a few years to upskill, but having that positive attitude towards accessibility and receptiveness to include it is really important.
Absolutely. When the enthusiasm is there, it's so much easier to add on to it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. There's so many things that we, you know, want to do from a process side of it, and, you know, having training materials, and, you know, there's a big to-do list to do on that side of things to make sure that some things just happen and don't need an accessibility specialist, you know, in there at every sort of second. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to step back a little bit, because we'll have all of that in place a bit more formally than we do at the moment. So that's, yeah, definitely something that we're working on.
The next question we have on deck for you is, what unique challenges do you see in the mobile app space compared to web for designing accessible experiences?
Challenges. Yeah, iOS and Android can operate differently. They can announce things differently. The scaling can work differently. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, having a consistent experience across the two platforms, designing a consistent experience, whilst also taking the native sort of behaviors into account and taking advantage of those native behaviors where possible. Also, as an organization, we're looking for consistency across mobile platform or delivery sort of services and web services. We do link to pages on the web within the mobile app. So having that cross consistency can also be a little bit of a challenge design wise. You know, a heading is a heading is a heading, but with the different size viewports on, you know, mobile devices as opposed to web, they can look quite differently, but we want to have that equivalent experience. Things do behave differently, web and mobile. So, but making sure that we have the links and the equivalent design, I guess, across those two platforms is a little bit of a challenge, can be a bit of a challenge. Yeah, does that answer the question?
I think so. Moving on to the next question. How regularly do you review your defined standards, and how do you keep them up to date with the newest developments in the web accessibility space?
Reviewing design standards is not something that I personally do, because I'm more in the accessibility team as opposed to the design team. So how often they review their design approach and standards, I couldn't specifically say to that. But what I am confident in is that when those reviews are done, accessibility would be fed in so that any changes or, you know, updates that are made following changes of design standards, also accessibility is still taken into account in those reviews.
I know before today's session, we were talking a little bit about the role of automation in designing accessible products. Can you speak more to that topic?
Yeah, automation is it's a really interesting area because it's not necessarily an easy area. Accessibility testing isn't necessarily an easy area to automate, and you can't automate all of it. There's still going to be you know, manual testing that is needed for many aspects of accessibility. But we have been able to actually do that in the mobile platform. We've made use of Applitools and Perfecto to include some aspects of accessibility in with our automated testing suite. So we have a large text baseline. So we're comparing differences in large text mode to make sure that nothing sort of slips in daily development. You know, the agile development process means that changes are made and are, you know, uploaded into the builds sort of daily. So we run these suites every day overnight to check that nothing's crept into our standard flows or core flows, the payments, the login, that kind of thing accidentally. So automation is really powerful. And there are aspects of accessibility that you can include in there, you know, checking color contrast, checking the scaling that I've mentioned. We've also adapted to check some of the underlying code in our automation suite. So we can check that, you know, a heading yesterday is still a heading today. And, you know, we don't have any images in there that aren't excluded but shouldn't be excluded. Does that make sense? So yeah, the automation side of it is a great area, I think, that can be utilized perhaps more widely in accessibility, but we just need to drill down and see how we can make it work for us.
And we'll close out with one final question today. So if you were to have participants take away one thing from today's session, what is the most important tidbit of knowledge you want to pass on?
Oh gosh, you've just got to ask that question. What about accessibility? Have you thought about accessibility? And I think once you start saying the word or saying that question, that phrase, what about accessibility, you're on that path of awareness and upskilling and inclusion and inclusive design. So I reckon it's just that question. Have you thought about accessibility? What about accessibility? Have we got provision for accessibility in our project? You know, have we estimated for it? Do we have resources for it? And have we done that right up front? You know, it's not just testing. Accessibility, it needs to be considered from the start. It can be back fixed, but it gets more difficult, more time consuming, more expensive, as does a lot of things, you know, if you leave it to the end to sort of back fix and add it in at the end. You need to have it at the beginning, and then the end will be accessible. So yeah, maybe just that question. Ask the question, what about accessibility?
Answering a question with a question. What a way to end. Thank you so much, Allison. It's been highly enlightening. Thank you to all the participants, and we'll see you next AxCon.
Thank you. Thanks very much for listening.